the new hybrid arrangements. Timings of debates have been amended to allow technical arrangements to be made for the next debate. There will also be suspensions between each debate. I remind members participating physically and virtually that they must arrive at the start of debates in Westminster Hall. Members are expected to remain for the entire debate. I must also remind members participating virtually that they must leave their camera on for the duration of the debate, and that they will be visible at all times, both to each other and to us in the Boothroyd room. If members attending virtually have any technical problems, they should email Westminster Hall Clerks, email address which is westminsterhallclerks@parliament.uk. Members attending physically should clean their spaces before they use them as they leave the room. I should also like to remind members that Mr Speaker has stated that masks should be worn in Westminster Hall. Members who are not on the call list but wish to intervene can only do so from the horseshoe. I remind members that those on the call list have priority for spaces on the horseshoe. Those wishing to intervene should not prevent a member from the call list from speaking. I therefore call on Matt Vickers to move the motion.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 550379 relating to the protection of hedgehogs. I'd like to thank the petition creator and all those who signed this petition for giving us this important opportunity to address this issue. And in fact, on behalf of the Right Honourable Member for Ludlow, who's sorry not to be able to be with us today, he talked about the incredible contribution made by the British Hedgehog Protection Society, Preservation Society, who are based in his constituency. The last time we had the pleasure of a debate on hedgehogs in Parliament was apparently almost 6 years ago in November 2015. During that debate, the former member for Penrith and the Borders, the Right Honourable Rory Stewart, gave a fantastic, impassioned speech on hedgehogs from the dispatch box. I know there was a call from the former MP for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport to make the hedgehog the UK's national animal. Whilst I have a great appreciation for hedgehogs, and despite this country's love of the hedgehog, I agree with Mr Stewart that choosing an animal that rolls into a ball at any sign of danger and sleeps for half the year is not necessarily the image we wanted to portray as a nation. Before that debate in 2015, the last time Parliament had debated the issue was 1566, when in true Tudor fashion they discussed a bounty on hedgehogs. So this is only the second debate since 1566 we've had on hedgehogs, and I am honoured to be introducing it. We've come a long way in how we treat hedgehogs in this country. Thankfully, we've moved past the idea that hedgehogs are a pest that prey on resting cows and that need to be exterminated. We now have a greater understanding of the great British hedgehog, their image now being used in election campaigns or to teach children the Green Cross Code to the tune of Staying Alive. They're now a much-loved part of the British countryside, and whilst they aren't particularly cuddly, these prickly creatures have come to occupy a very special place in the hearts of people, not just in my constituency, but right across the UK. Despite their relatively newfound popularity, however, the British hedgehog is facing a number of varied and complex threats. Before this debate, I had the pleasure of meeting with representatives from the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, and they told me that since 2000, we've lost half of all of our rural hedgehogs and a third of our urban ones. Sadly, they were recently added to the IUCN Red List for Britain as vulnerable. That is, have an appreciable risk of extinction in the next 10 years. As I've said, the problems hedgehogs are facing are numerous, and it is difficult to point to one factor as the sole reason for the population's decline. This is partly a reflection on how varied their habitats can be. Modern farming practices have been blamed, including the use of pesticides that will kill hedgehogs' prey or potentially poison the hedgehogs themselves. A loss of habitat has similarly been pointed at, with larger fields and fewer hedgerows in modern agricultural practices. And of course, there are questions around the impact of climate change on hedgehogs' hibernating habits. Currently, hedgehogs are protected from some methods of killing and collection under Schedule 6 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. This petition is asking for that protection to be increased to Schedule 5, which would offer protection from all intentional killing, injuring or taking, and also prohibits them from being sold. I know from the government's response to the petition that they have not previously moved hedgehogs into Schedule 5, as they have no evidence that hedgehogs are being intentionally killed. This, I'm sure, we're all grateful for. I'd hope people wouldn't do something as cruel. However, there is a problem of hedgehogs being sold. In recent years, there's been an increase in people owning hedgehogs as pets. Although they are the African pygmy hedgehog and not the variety we find native in the UK, the sale of these cute little creatures, although they aren't as cute as the Great British Hedgehog, is not necessarily the problem. The problem arises when people start to snatch the hedgehogs they find at the bottom of their garden and sell them on for £300 a pop, threatening population numbers and creating biosecurity risks. Moving hedgehogs to Schedule 5 would prevent this. Of course, I'd welcome other measures to help hedgehog numbers bounce back. I know from speaking to Anne Purchase-Walker, who runs Stockton Hoggy Rescue, that a large number of hedgehogs fall victim to weed strimmers. Greater awareness on behalf of people using them and a quick check in the grass before you start cutting would go a long way. Similarly, developers creating less robust fencing and walling and hedgehog highways that link up green spaces so that hedgehogs can better forage for food would also be welcome. I know the government is not deaf to this issue. I was pleased to see in their response to this petition that they are committed to taking action to recover threatened native species, and they're exploring the use of powers in the Environment Bill to strengthen commitments to improve the status of this threatened species. The petition's request to move hedgehogs to Schedule 5 would go some way in helping the numbers to bounce back. However, we would welcome any policy that would help protect this much-loved animal, and I would happily look to see what the government can put forward. One thing, however, is clear. We need to act now. Losing half of the rural population in 2 decades shows that the decline is rapid and the situation critical. There is no point in letting the situation get worse before we step in and trying to halt the decline. Intervention now will make this task easier and cheaper and make sure that our prickly little friends remain pride of place in Britain's countryside. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 550379 relating to the protection of hedgehogs. I now call upon Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr Twigg, and it is a pleasure to serve under you as chair of this debate. And can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Stockton South for speaking on behalf of the petitioners so eloquently. Now, a remarkable number of people signed this petition, Mr Twigg, started by the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. This shows how much people in the UK really care about hedgehogs and about protecting the nature around us. And I should just say, as I went to the library to print out my speech, when they found it was about hedgehogs, I was accosted by one of the staff who insisted on showing me her photograph of the hedgehogs in her garden. So it's everywhere, Mr Twigg. In fact, the hedgehog has been voted Britain's most popular wild mammal in several surveys over the years. Now, as we heard, since 2000, hedgehog numbers in the UK have declined by half in rural areas and by a third in urban ones. According to the RSPCA, the main reasons for the decline is destruction of their shelters and habitats, increased levels of traffic and poorly planned roads, and the use of pesticides. These are all things that we can and should work to prevent. The hedgehog, as we heard, has been listed as vulnerable to extinction in the UK, conceivably within the next decade if nothing is done to reverse the decline. Now, I recently visited Sandra Lowe, who lives in Woodside in my constituency, and Sandra operates a hedgehog rescue called Hope for Hedgehogs. Sandra works tirelessly when people bring hedgehogs to her to ensure that they are properly treated, that she treats them medically. She works with local vets to ensure they get the right medication, that they does everything that she can to keep them. And with the little ones, that involves getting up 3 times during the night to feed them with the appropriate food. It certainly is a labour of love, and thankfully there are some people who will help her with that. But Sandra funds this entirely by herself, and she says it costs around £50 for each of the hedgehogs to be treated and released. And their organisation is entirely self-funded, which is why I'm supporting her case to arrange funding, to obtain funding to create a hog hospital so that she can treat these hedgehogs properly. A lot of people, like Sandra in my constituency, are doing amazing work to help protect hedgehogs, but it's not enough to rely on the work of volunteers. The government must commit to protecting our wildlife. And most of all, we know that Sandra and all those other volunteers would want to see the priority being the prevention of injury and damage and death of hedgehogs. That is the really important thing. Real consideration for nature and wildlife must be at the core of our planning decisions and many other decisions. So I and many others, including the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, are concerned by the proposed changes to the status of many of our widespread species in the United Kingdom, including hedgehogs. The Joint Nature Conservation Committee and its review will provide recommendations, as we have heard, to the Secretary of State for DEFRA. And as far as I understand it from Sandra and from others, the upcoming review seeks to change the eligibility criteria of the hedgehog, currently listed on Schedule 6, if that is what the recommendations are. So the review proposes, Sandra tells me, that statutory nature conservation bodies will only retain protected status for species that are imminent danger of extinction in Great Britain. This is clearly too low a bar to set, and the government, I hope, will be much more ambitious. The effect of the proposed changes could mean that rather than increasing protection for hedgehogs, as called for in the petition being debated, their current lower level of protection could be removed. So Sandra tells me that she has real concerns about the impact of the quinquennial review. So I hope that the Minister will be able to assure me and Sandra that actually there will be increased protection and no diminution of protection. Now, the government's National Planning Policy Framework has a chapter on conserving and enhancing the natural environment. It opens by setting out how planning policies and decisions should contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment. And priority species are defined in the NPPF as those included in the England Biodiversity List, published by the Secretary of State under Section 41 of the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006. As set out above, this list currently includes hedgehogs. The Environment Bill 2021-22 contains provisions intended to make it mandatory for housing and development, subject to some narrow exemptions, to achieve at least a 10% net gain in value for biodiversity, a requirement that habitats for wildlife must be left in a measurably better state than before the development. And I would say, Mr Twigg, that very many of us know that we can see the words on the page when it comes to planning, policy and guidance. What we need to see is the impact on the ground. We've seen too many hedgerows lost and other biodiversity losses, even now. So in this debate today, we're calling on the government to increase the protection offered to the hedgehog under the Wildlife and Countryside Act by moving it to Schedule 5 as a first step in helping to protect our precious wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to let you know, I intend to take the opposition spokesperson and the Minister starting the wind-ups at no later than 20 minutes to 6. Given the great deal of interest and the number of speakers here, if everyone was, in order to enable everyone to get in and say make their speech, if you could keep your contributions to around 4.5 minutes, then we should ensure that everybody would actually get in now. So I ask for your indulgence in that. Can I call Teresa Villas?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Twigg. It's a pleasure to be able to take part in this debate and under your chairmanship, and I thank all the people who signed the petition. I was deeply worried to learn from the emails from constituents that I received about this debate of the disastrous decline in hedgehog numbers. Both the preceding speakers have referred to these numbers, that we've lost half in rural areas and a third in urban ones. And of course, as we've heard today, this much-loved animal has recently been added to the IUCN Red List and designated as vulnerable, with an appreciable risk of extinction within 10 years. So there is a need for urgent action, and I would really press the Minister to enhance protection for hedgehogs as called for in today's petition. In particular, planning rules do need to be changed to require the presence of hedgehogs to be taken into consideration when deciding whether to grant permission for development. And please can the Minister also provide reassurance that the quinquennial review of Schedules 5 and 8 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act will not lead to any weakening of current protections. And most important of all, I urge the government to include hedgehog habitats in its extensive programme on nature recovery. There can be no doubt that decline in habitats is a key driver in the loss of hedgehogs. And we need the biodiversity net gain provisions of the Environment Bill to be implemented so that a new income stream is created for protecting wildlife habitats. And I want to see councils also encouraged to include hedgehog recovery strategies in their local nature recovery strategies, which the bill will require them to establish. And of course, I note the efforts by Natural England and DEFRA to create a national nature recovery network. And this is a further crucial opportunity to alleviate the pressure on the vulnerable creatures that we're debating today. Connected wildlife corridors can make a huge difference to recovery of this species. So I hope the voice of today's petitioners will be heard by ministers, and particularly as they design and implement this country's new system of farm support. There can be little doubt that some modern farming practices have made survival more difficult for this country's favourite prickly mammal. So the ELM schemes, which will replace the European Union's Common Agricultural Policy, should aim to secure and restore hedgerows and habitats to give our hedgehogs a bit of a Brexit dividend. And as we've heard, I'm afraid back in 1566, this Parliament put a bounty on hedgehogs, which apparently led to the death of as many as 2 million in the period up to 1800. Well, I'm really hoping today's debate has a much more positive outcome. Now, this government has a stronger commitment on nature recovery than any of its predecessors ever before. So when they set what I hope will be a really ambitious 2030 target for species conservation, I would urge them to ensure that a thriving hedgehog population is included in that as a very important goal.
Here, here.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and a pleasure to speak up for the hedgehog. Although I represent a largely urban constituency, the hedgehog is equally at home amongst our parks, gardens and untidied corners that it is in the countryside, and many residents of Hull West and Hessle welcome its presence. I'd like to pay tribute to the fantastic work of Carolyn Harmon of Hessle Hedgehog Rescue in providing care for sick and injured animals and advice on making the area hedgehog friendly. Sadly though, as mentioned by honourable members already, the hedgehog numbers continue to decline, and the People's Trust for Endangered Species survey, which is conducted by citizen scientists, demonstrate that hedgehog numbers have fallen by around 50% in the last 20 years. So there is no doubt that urgent action needs to be taken, and this petition reflects that urgency. In the government's response to the petition, it stated that, quote, it has not previously moved to protect this species under Schedule 5 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981, as it is not clear that such protection would be of benefit for the species, insofar that we have no evidence that intentionally killing, taking or injuring hedgehogs is currently an issue, and it would not address the main threat of habitat loss. This appears to be referring to the protections found in section 9.1. While the petition only mentions Schedule 5, I'm assuming that this petition also refers to the protections under section 9.4, which include protections for habitat from intentional disturbance and damage. And the Minister may not be aware, but I'm proud to be the butterfly conservation species champion for the brimstone butterfly, which is the flagship species of Hull's Butterfly City project. He may also be interested to know that the marsh fritillary, the Hell fritillary, the large blue and the UK's largest butterfly, the swallowtail, are also included in Schedule 5 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. And I can assure the Minister that the main threat to all these butterfly species is habitat loss, and they're also included on section 9.4. Every other mammal considered vulnerable to extinction in the UK is currently on Schedule 7, hazel dormice, 2 species of bat, and the Orkney voles. I think even the layperson who is familiar with the behaviour of hedgehogs can imagine how these provisions in 9.5 would protect them without having to have a detailed knowledge of their habitat requirements. Many are familiar with the hedgehog's liking for the shelter of a nice compost heap or tucked up beneath the garden shed. In fact, hedgehogs can journey at distances of up to 2 kilometres per night and build several nests across their home range. It is clear to see how protection from disturbance or harm to their nesting site, as well as the hedgehogs themselves, would be of benefit. The hedgehog and other wildlife can also be helped with changes to the planning law, as mentioned. There are many ways that biodiversity can be built into housing and commercial developments. Hedgehog highways, wildlife corridors, swift and other bird box built into buildings. There are already fantastic examples of the benefits of these backed up by research. It just requires the will from government to make such things mandatory. And this petition is timely because, as mentioned by my honourable friend, the Wildlife and Countryside Act is undergoing its 5-yearly review of the species included. However, I'm extremely concerned to hear that the terms of this year's review have been changed, and that contrary to what a reasonable person might expect, given the well-documented decline in biodiversity across the board, this is likely to result in fewer species under protection, not more. The new standards would mean that an animal or plant species would only be protected if in imminent danger of extinction, with the result that dozens of species face losing vital safeguards. It also means that action to protect a species would only come when it was in crisis, when it already might be too late. This cannot be right. I understand that over 30 conservation groups have written to ministers voicing their concerns, and I would welcome the minister taking this opportunity to explain why it was felt the standards needed changing and how they expect the changes to halt the decline in species numbers. Although I welcome the assurances given in response to the petition relating to forthcoming legislation, given the changes to the way the current Act is being reviewed, it is difficult to have confidence in the final detail measuring up to the promises. The hedgehog needs increased and meaningful protections now, not fuzzy or even prickly assurances about their future. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Grayling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Twigg. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I rise as following another parliamentary species champion, but I am indeed perhaps the most topical species champion today because I am the species champion for the hedgehog. And indeed, as the Minister knows, and I know the Minister is committed to these issues, I have started, probably not biting our ankles, but prickling our ankles over this for some while now and intend to carry on doing so. And I would say it is 6 years since this House debated the hedgehog. I very much hope that we won't need to do so again soon. But if necessary, it will not be another 6 years before we debate these issues. It is a national tragedy that we have lost so much of our wildlife. And actually, if you look across the range of species that have suffered catastrophic declines in recent years, they are profoundly disturbing and worrying. But the hedgehog, it's not just the last 20 years. There were, in the 1950s, Mr. Twigg, nearly as many hedgehogs as people in the United Kingdom. Today, it is a tiny fraction of our population, perhaps 1.5 million hedgehogs survive. We have got to turn this round. We've got to turn this round not just for hedgehogs, but actually for all the species that have suffered those declines. And we've got to start doing it now, because we cannot see the numbers decline and decline and decline. And there are a whole variety of reasons why this has happened. It is true, it's habitat loss. We've seen, sadly, over the years, too many hedgehogs die on our roads, though I have to say today that it is relatively rare to see a hedgehog dead on our roads. And of course, one of the things that remains a subject of debate is that we see rather a lot of badgers dead on our roads, but rather fewer hedgehogs than used to be the case. But I'm not here today to point a finger at the badger, though I think there are issues around competition between our species for ever diminishing habitats. What I am here to do is to argue for tangible government measures to address the issue. Now, I know there's a lot of debate today about the specific review taking place this year. I think there is a genuine cause for concern there, and I hope the Minister will address that in her remarks. because none of us want to see formal reduction or protection for species. And she knows my concerns about the quinquennial review and the way it's approaching the issue of creatures like the hedgehog. So I hope she'll be able to set everybody's minds at rest today when she makes her remarks. But I hope she also recognises, with the scale of this petition, the genuine concern out there, and I'd echo the words of congratulations to the British Hedgehog Preservation Society and also to Hedgehog Street, who have done a fantastic job in promoting the need for action, and also to all those groups around the country who are doing so much to try to protect hedgehogs, to rescue hedgehogs when they're in danger, to rescue baby hedgehogs that may not survive a winter, to look after those that have been injured. I would pay tribute to the team at Wildlife Aid, just outside my constituency in Leatherhead, who do a fantastic job. I've been down there on many occasions to see the work they're doing with hedgehogs that have run into difficulties in life. And of course, that work is valuable all around the country, all the different projects. But there's a bigger picture issue to solve here. And it was brought home to me particularly by a message I received from one of the hedgehog groups this week, distraught about the fact that just down the road from where they're based, a developer starting to clear a site ahead of development had killed a significant number of hedgehogs just clearing the undergrowth alongside a roadway to begin to make way for that development. Now, Mr. Twigg, we in this country do a lot of work according to law before we develop sites to check for bats, to check for newts. But I want the government to think differently about this, because actually searching for an individual species on a development site is not, in my view, the right way forward. What we actually need to move towards is a holistic approach to the nature on a development site. Of course, we're still going to need to develop for the future. We're going to need to provide housing for the future. But we should do that with care. And one of the things I hope to see come out of the government in the next few months is a plan to turn the current system into one of holistic analysis of what wildlife is on a site and what needs to be protected, so you don't simply bulldoze a roadside or cut down a hedgerow with no regard at all for what animals are inside it, and all too often it's the hedgehogs who are inside it. That is a change that is urgently needed. And when I did not move, and she'll be aware, I tabled an amendment to move the hedgehog into Schedule 5 protection in the Environment Bill. The reason I didn't push that amendment was that I do understand the legislative framework is not right for today's world. It is focused particularly on human intent against animals. Nobody's seriously suggesting everybody wants to kill hedgehogs. But I'm expecting the quid pro quo from her, which is a proper, urgent review of the legislative framework to address things like the circumstance I've just described, where a developer does not have to look holistically for the full range of species on a site, but can just make sure there's no bats, make sure there's no newts, and everything else just gets bulldozed out of the way. That cannot be right, and I very much hope she will change that going forwards. There's two other things, Mr. Twigg, I'll be asking of ministers today. The first is around habitats for hedgehogs and other species. One of the reasons we've seen the decline in numbers has been the disappearance of hedgerows. And I very much hope that the implementation of the Agriculture Bill and of the new Agriculture Support Framework will genuinely encourage farmers to put back some of those lost habitats. CPRE is just in the process of launching what I think will be a very timely campaign to get more hedgerows planted in this country, Mr. Twigg, and I hope the government will take that on board and will ensure that the support it provides to farmers encourages them not just to have wider margins at the sides of existing fields, that's to be welcomed, but also to start replanting hedgerows for the future, because they are vital habitats. And my final request to the Minister is this. It is also important, where there are species that move long distances, that there is the ability for them to do so. And we've heard colleagues have mentioned today hedgehog highways, developers being encouraged to put holes in fences. That's very good and should continue to be encouraged. But we also need, in areas of open country, where there are development threats, to make sure that corridors exist for the wildlife, not just the hedgehogs, but other species, so that we don't just lock away one bit of habitat from another. You lose the movement between the two, and ultimately the species decline and die. That also has to change. So those are my three requests to her. Make sure that we have proper planning for highways between different habitats. Make sure that we look at supporting the recovery of hedgerows, but particularly protections for the, species like the hedgehog in law that prevents their developers simply from ripping up a site with no regard for what's there. And if she delivers all that, then she will be able to take pride in the future that she has played a big part in turning the tide of the tragic decline of numbers of the hedgehog.
Quite right. James Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to speak in this debate as always. As is often said in this chamber, conservation is not a hobby for me, but it is a duty, and one which I take very seriously. I'm very pleased to follow the Honourable Gentleman for Epsom and Ewell and wholeheartedly endorse his request and comments to have hedgerows retained and field edges to also be enhanced. That's something that I do on the land that I have the opportunity to have some input into. I'm very blessed to live in a family farm with my son living just on the farm up a very long laneway, so it gives you a chance to see where the hedgerows are, see the edges of the lanes and ensure that they're kept. And during lockdown, the ability to wander through the beautiful countryside surrounding my home and read my briefings and do my, as I did, daily Bible readings was one of the things that kept me sane. It made me appreciate what I have outside my window that little bit more. For me, there is a real passion to ensure that my grandchildren will have the same ability to enjoy nature when they reach my age in the same way that I do. So retaining hedgerows, field edges, is something that I wholeheartedly endorse. Hedgehogs are under extreme pressure. Indeed, information that I have, and the Honourable Gentleman referred to badgers. Badgers find that hedgehogs are quite a bit of a delicacy for them. So I think that badgers are renowned for probably feasting on the hedgehogs more than they probably should. One part of this fight for our countryside is that of the declining number of hedgehogs. Ulster Wildlife has an entire section on how to help hedgehogs due to decline, which they highlight as follows. Hedgehogs are in trouble. They have declined by 30% in the last 10 years alone. Now thought to be less, fewer than 1 million left in the UK. And whether you live in the town or country, you cannot help to look after these much-loved creatures by providing food, water and shelter. Their useful site then goes on to outline ways to help and further gives links to donate to adopt a hedgehog. I can remember when my boys were at school, a project that was done on hedgehogs, and I sincerely hope that there is still a school project to raise awareness of just how vital these little creatures are to our ecosystem. My constituents who signed this petition in Strangford outlined the dire straits that our population of hedgehogs find themselves in. Since 2000, the year 2000, hedgehog numbers in the UK have declined by half in rural areas and by a third in urban ones. I very rarely see one or any of them about now in smaller numbers, perhaps what we did in the past, and that's with us taking a direct interest to try and retain the habitat for them. For this reason, BHPS is asking for hedgehogs to be removed from Schedule 6 to Schedule 5 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1980 to allow them greater protection, and I would support that. However, my constituents have expressed concern that their understanding that the 2021 review seeks to change the eligibility criteria of the hedgehog, currently listed in Schedule 6. It is proposed that the country-based statutory nature conservation bodies will only retain protected status for species that are in imminent danger of extinction in Great Britain. Well, I suggest that the hedgehog very clearly is. The shift in focus will preferentially consider GB red listed species, as defined by the IUCN. But the IUCN guidance specifically identifies automatic use of red list categories in policy as an inappropriate use of the red list. So this is the wrong bar to set. And if they set a bar that's wrong, then we need to get it right. So I look, as I often do, with respect to our Minister, to come back with the response that I know that she will. The effect of the proposed changes would mean that rather than increasing protection for hedgehogs, as called for in a petition being debated, their current minor level of protection will be removed altogether. The change will make it legal to sell hedgehogs. Worse still, they will lose protection from killing and injury. And I just can't believe that that's possible. The current petition makes clear that hedgehogs have widespread public support, are in need of enhanced protection. Hedgehogs have been voted Britain's most popular wild mammal in several surveys. Example, BBC Wildlife in 2013 winning 42% of the vote, and the Royal Society of Biology in 2016 winning more than double the votes of the second placed animal. So quite clearly, hedgehogs are a favourite of the general public. Removing the hedgehog's legal protection would be widely viewed as inappropriate and extremely a perverse response to the parliamentary petition, which has been backed by over 100,000 voters. So I would ask the Minister, in summing up, to consider this well thought out flag that has been raised. We need to do something, but it must be the right thing. I think what we're all saying is do the right thing. We need to enhance protection and indeed fund a breeding programme to release hedgehogs into safe places throughout the countryside. And I look to the ministers, I often do, to outline this very plan of action. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to remind members to wear masks if they're not speaking while in this room, please. Our next call, Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. My right honourable friend, the member for Epsom, remarked upon the fact that there are now far fewer hedgehogs dead on the roads. Perversely, that is not a good sign, it's a bad sign, because the reason for it is there are so many fewer hedgehogs than there used to be. It's hard to find one now. And yet when I was a lad, you'd go out every night into the garden and there would be 1 or 2 or 3 hedgehogs snuffling around. And the change has been absolutely dramatic. I understand that the government wants to wait for the findings of the Joint Nature Conservation Committee review before taking any action. But we can't wait much longer. The People's Trust for Endangered Species has indicated very clearly that the hedgehog is vulnerable to extinction. It's on the red list for British mammals. It's on the red list for British mammals. An animal that, as my right honourable friend again said, used to be almost as many hedgehogs as there were people in the United Kingdom. Now that number has dwindled to insignificance. The government says in its policy papers that it wants to, and I quote, recover our threatened native species. And one of the reasons for not accepting the recommendation today, as I understand it, is because, again, and I'm quoting for a government comment, it would not address the main threat of habitat loss. No, it wouldn't, and that is the main threat. And it is because of planning policy, current government planning policy, that habitat loss is worsening. The National Policy Planning Framework says that policy should contribute to enhance the natural and local environment. Well, that, Mr. Twigg, is hogwash, possibly hedgehog wash. We're not enhancing our natural and our local environment and our agricultural environment. Every time that farm fields are built over, hedgerows go, headlands go, the fields themselves that had crops in them go. And those are the habitats, not just for hedgehogs, but for thousands, literally thousands, of birds, mammals, butterflies, insects, the insects upon which hedgehogs feed. And it's because of that loss of habitat that we've lost so many hedgehogs. The hedgerows, the meadowland, the rough pasture that we're told hedgehogs in the wild live on are going, which is why the numbers are decreasing so dramatically in rural areas. I'm pleased that my honourable friend the Minister is in her place today to answer this debate, but I rather wish that there was a planning minister sitting listening to this as well, and perhaps responding. Because unless we get to grips with the fact that we are building over agricultural land, we're protecting the green belt, we're told. Yes, we are protecting the green belt, but agricultural land is being built over, in the south of England particularly, to an extent that is positively dangerous, both in terms of food production and in terms of our wildlife. Mr. Twigg, this has got to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for the first time, Mr. Twigg, and to follow my right honourable friend for North Thanet, with whom I have cooperated over many years on issues of animal husbandry, and all the honourable members who have spoken so passionately this afternoon about hedgehogs. Across the royal town of Sutton and Coldfield, I know that many Suttonians wish to see greater protection for our local hedgehog population, and this is reflected in the huge number of people that asked me to attend the debate and speak in it today. 185 people from Sutton Coldfield signed the petition which we are debating. I would like to pay tribute in particular to the Snuffles Hedgehog Rescue Service, which is based in Foreiggs in my constituency. Claire and her partner Matt have been rescuing and looking after local hedgehogs for 8 years, once they built up their knowledge and expertise after rescuing a hedgehog they found needing help. And since 2013, they've built up a local network of volunteers, including people that help clean the facilities, provide foster care for hedgehogs as they recover, and people to rehome hedgehogs in a safe environment. In December last year, I supported a new clause in the Environment Bill, which I think my right honourable friend from Epsom and Newell has been referring to, which would have added the hedgehog to the list of protected animals under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. This would introduce a legal imperative to search for hedgehogs in building developments and to mitigate the impact on their habitat, as we do, for example, for bats. I'm glad to have the opportunity today to speak briefly in favour of this greater protection for our hedgehogs. We know, as others have said, that there is significant public support for additional safeguards, and time again, surveys show, as my honourable friend from Strangford said, just how loved hedgehogs are by British people. They've been voted Britain's most popular wild mammal in several surveys, including in the BBC Wildlife Survey in 2013. Over the past 2 decades, as we've heard, hedgehog numbers across the UK have plummeted by 50% in rural areas and 30% in urban areas. And I support the British Hedgehogs Preservation Society's campaign for hedgehogs to be moved from Schedule 6 to Schedule 5 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 to allow them greater protection, notwithstanding the legitimate reservations that my right honourable friend from Epsom and Newell has mentioned. I've been concerned, as others have, to read that the 7th quinquennial review of Schedules 5 and 8 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act could bring in changes that would have an impact on the status of many of our native species, including hedgehogs. I understand that the review seeks to change the eligibility criteria of the hedgehog, currently listed on Schedule 6. It is proposed that the country-based statutory nature conservation bodies will only retain protected status for species that are in imminent danger of extinction in the United Kingdom. And I echo the words of my honourable friend from Strangford. The effect of the proposed changes could mean that rather than increasing protection for hedgehogs, as my constituents have asked, the level of protection that they currently enjoy could be removed altogether. Mr. Twigg, hedgehogs are, as we have heard, currently protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, Schedule 6, as well as the Wild Mammals Protection Act 1996. This makes it illegal to kill or capture them using certain methods and prohibits cruelty and mistreatment. However, this legislation doesn't actually address many of the reasons why hedgehogs have declined over the past 20 years, and I believe we need to take further action to help conserve wild hedgehog populations. Ensuring that hedgehogs are listed under Schedule 5 would allow them greater protection. This would ensure that their nesting sites, as well as the hedgehogs themselves, are protected from disturbance or harm, and this would offer hedgehogs the same protection as hazel dormice, red squirrels, water voles, otters, and all our bat species. This government, Mr. Twigg, has a strong track record when it comes to environmental issues, including our commitment to net zero. Our world-leading Environment Bill will set a new and ambitious framework for environmental governance to address environmental challenges, including biodiversity loss and climate change. We have committed to leaving the environment in a better state than we inherited it. I cannot therefore understand why all these great changes we are making, that ministers are not considering strengthening our protection for hedgehogs, and I look forward to listening to this very accomplished minister explain what plans the government has in that respect.
Thank you. I call Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate my honourable friend for initiating this debate. I welcome the discussion today. The protection of hedgehogs is a topic that I hold close to my heart. As some of my Twitter followers may have seen, we recently welcomed a new tenant to the Halfon household. Horace the Hedgehog moved into our garden earlier this year, and he's very much made himself at home. And given these modern times, although we have called him Horace, he clearly is a he, him, or she, her hedgehog. He's even been brave enough to approach the back door to try and watch Netflix through the window, particularly Sons of Anarchy, and he's risen to dizzying heights of fame on our social media page. And I've had individuals write to my office whether Horace will be making an appearance in upcoming Zoom meetings. I want to take the opportunity to thank the numerous individuals who kindly wrote to me with advice on how to care for Horace and to provide an update on Horace's recent escapades. It shows just how much the public love hedgehogs and how much interest there is in looking after these wonderful animals. I may spend months making a speech on education, and a few people might notice, but in terms of when it comes to Horace the Hedgehog, it's literally thousands of people who have written to me or commented or whatever it may be. I'm led to believe that Horace may have found himself a partner, and he now has a proper hedgehog house that we've been able to purchase, and there may be some hoglets on the way. And since Horace's appearance, I'm pleased to say that the slug plague in my garden has vanished, and I understand that hedgehogs roll them into what's called slug con carne. In 2013, hedgehogs were voted Britain's favourite wild animal, and despite the public's immense love for these small and spiny creatures, as has been said many times in this debate, the hedgehog's existence is hung in the balance. And I was deeply saddened to learn that since 2000, hedgehog numbers in the UK have declined by half in rural areas and by a third in urban ones. The speed of this decline is akin to dropping off a cliff. And in July 2020, the British hedgehog became officially classified as vulnerable to extinction when it was added, again, as has been highlighted, to the red list for British mammals. I mean, that is extraordinarily depressing. And that's why we have to do all we can to ensure that these special creatures are protected, and we need to eliminate the risk of them disappearing from the UK forever. I would strongly favour our children being educated at school about mammals on the red list, particularly about hedgehogs, because it is important that we learn about these animals and learn how to look after them. Some of my Harlow residents have written to me to ask that the government acts to move hedgehogs to Schedule 5 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 to allow them greater protection. And so I just would be hugely grateful if the Minister could outline what measures will be taken to preserve and enhance the UK's hedgehog population. Since the arrival of Horace Hedgehog in my garden, I've taken great care to educate myself on what steps can be taken on an individual basis to look after hedgehogs. So I just would urge members of the public that what I have learned is that if a hedgehog pays a visit to your garden, please be sure to leave out a bowl of water and allow areas of your garden to remain wild. Hedgehog use piles of leaf litter and logs to build their nests. And Horace actually found some plastic, I should say, a plastic bag, not from my garden, I should stress, and actually used it to cover the leaves in which he was using as his home before he had the hedgehog house that we were able to give him. We should all look to adopt hedgehog-friendly habits. Horace has changed my understanding and helped me develop a real love for hedgehogs. And I hope very much, Mr. Chairman, that this debate will ensure that the preservation of these species will become a real priority. It's only the second debate on hedgehogs in many, many hundreds of years, as I understand it. And I hope it will mean a sea change, that hedgehogs will no longer be a potentially extinct mammal, but they will be flourishing once again up and down our streets in Britain, not just in Harlow, but across the country.
Thank you. I call Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I also thank the honourable member for Stockton South for calling the debate. And it's It's also an honour to be in the room with a true hedgehog champion, the Right Honourable Member for Epsom, who has done so much for this cause to further it to parliamentary debate. As we've heard many times, the hedgehog has been voted the most popular British wild mammal. But those numbers that we've heard about really are truly shocking. To hear that we are down to potentially our last million hedgehogs is something that I think all of us cannot fail to see is extremely worrying. And just to be able to read that they are vulnerable to extinction is something that, when certainly I was also growing up, was almost unheard of. But a decrease of over 50% in the last 20 years is something that we should all sit up and notice. And why? Well, I think the reason is essentially, certainly, that lockdown has focused our minds. It has made us reevaluate much of our lives. And I'm glad, because the environment has taken even more of a centre stage than ever before. And it has heightened our understanding of the delicately constructed ecosystems on which all of our society is built. Now, this debate is calling for hedgehogs' protections to be increased by moving their status on Schedule 6 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 to Schedule 5. However, as we have heard before, the 7th quinennial review of Schedule 5 and 8 of the Act potentially provides recommendations to DEFRA on major changes to these schedules. And this 2021 review seeks to change the eligibility criteria of the hedgehog currently listed on Schedule 6. Proposed that the country-based statutory nature conservation bodies will only retain protected status for species that are in imminent danger of extinction in Great Britain. Now, that shift in focus potentially will preferably consider GB red-listed species as defined by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And the effect of that proposed change could mean that rather than increasing protections for our hedgehogs, that their current minor level of protection may be further removed. And I think that is the nub of why so many of us are concerned, because simply we cannot allow that to happen. Already we have heard that the species is in significant decline. It's affected by many things, and we've heard already habitat loss, hedgerows, traffic accidents. The Right Honourable Member for North Thanet pointing out, absolutely, of course the numbers will be down on the road. The numbers are significantly down in our country alone. But also declining food as well, through the increased use of pesticides, is also a material reason why those numbers are decreased. So we must be doing absolutely everything we possibly can to increase their chances of survival and not diminishing them. Now, I just want to make a very quick mention of, in my constituency, Hedgehog Haven in North Walsham, a wonderful local organisation run by my constituent Marion Grimes. She has told me absolutely many times that governmental action to uphold our collective custodial responsibility is absolutely owed to these animals, and we can do that by government action. Having also sat on the Environmental Audit Select Committee, is absolutely true. We know from the report that we released in the last week or so that we have to do more for our domestic ecosystems. Even our chairman, the Right Honourable Member for Ludlow, has said that, and he's highlighted, that hedgehogs' health and their quantity are one of the best indicators of a healthy microenvironment. So whilst the government continues to do the work that it can, and we do welcome that, I hope that it's this debate that can really start to see a step change in the long-term prospects for hedgehog population. I think that the Joint Nature Conservation Committee's review must strengthen that protective legislation for hedgehogs, and absolutely, as I go back to the Environmental Audits Select Committee's findings on biodiversity in the last week or so, we have to be doing more. Whether it is planning, as we have heard, or agriculture legislation, we have to keep doing everything we possibly can for the protections of nature, and the very good starting point will be enhancing that protections for our population of hedgehogs here and now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I call Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. I would like to thank the member for Stockton South for presenting and introducing the debate in such a passionate manner. Clearly, this is a topic which matters to many people across the UK and to members across this House. As a member for Blaydon and others highlighted, it has been voted the most popular wild mammal in the UK, and I wish the campaign they highlighted for a hedgehog hospital all success. I'd also like to commend the work of the Hedgehog Preservation Society and Hedgehog Rescues, which have some fantastic names, Chair, such as Snuffles Hedgehog Rescue, mentioned by the member for Sutton Coldfield. There are clearly volunteers and groups up and down the country working to turn the tide on decline. We've heard about how people can make their gardens better habitats for hedgehogs, and simple interventions can make a big difference. We've heard memories and stories about the wonderful hedgehog from the member for North Thanet, sharing the regular sightings when there were as many hedgehogs in as people in the UK, and the member for Harlow's latest household member, Horace. We've heard about the decline and what the issues may be causing this, from habitat destruction, pesticides and other issues. We've heard about the incredible lives hedgehogs have, from the member from Hull West and Hessel, explaining that they can travel up to 2 kilometres a night, which is extraordinary. Before I directly address the prickly situation of hedgehogs, though, I read the department's answer to today's petition with great interest. Ministers have rightly framed their response to the plight of hedgehogs in relation to the wider issues of species abundance targets, even if they have yet to propose what those targets will be. We absolutely need biodiversity targets, and they should be ambitious. We shouldn't just halt the decline of hedgehogs and other nature, we should reverse it. Government ministers seem to agree. The Secretary of State has said he wants to not only stem the tide of the loss of nature, but to turn it around and leave the environment in a better state than we found it. I hope the Minister will use this debate to outline why, in the other place, the government's proposals for species abundance targets commit only to further the objective of halting a decline in the abundance of species, and what this means for hedgehogs. We need more than a halt to the decline. We should be aiming for a dramatic incline in species abundance and trying to reverse the trend for hedgehogs. Our hedgehog population is threatened, and in the response to this petition, the department says that it is reviewing the species that will be protected as part of the regular 5-year review. As highlighted by the honourable member for Stranford mentioned, this year the rules have changed. Animals will only be automatically added to the protected list if they are critically endangered, and only eligible to be added if they are endangered in the first place. What assurance can the Minister give that hedgehogs will receive the protections they deserve? Hedgehogs fit neither requirement outlined above. However, their numbers have rapidly declined by 50% in rural areas and a third in urban areas over the last 20 years. As the member for North Norfolk outlined, what will be done to keep the weaker protections they currently have? It's fantastic that the honourable member for Epsom and Ewell is the species champion for hedgehogs. In his speech, he reported on the steep decline since 1950. Hedgehog numbers have fallen from 30 million to 1.5 million. That is a shocking figure. And the need for a holistic approach to nature and development is clear. Will the Minister address what conversations are occurring across government to protect nature under new planning laws? I agree that with the member for Chipping Barnet, the decline means we need to protect hedgehog habitats, make considerations in planning, and we should also actively intervene to restore habitats as part of what we are doing to restore and create nature corridors and also the restoration of hedgerows. But we also need to continue to make space for hedgehogs with methods such as tunnels, hedgehog highways and hedgehog houses in our urban areas. The England Tree Action Plan commits a mere 12% of woodland coverage by mid-century, which is less than 7% less than the CCC recommendation of 19. While it is weak on woodland coverage, the document contains only 4 references to hedgerows. I'd be grateful to know from the Minister if they could set out specifically what the department will do to encourage the creation of more of these habitats, which are so beneficial to hedgehogs. But in addition to habitat restoration, there is also the wider point to make about species abundance targets. It's a strange approach to biodiversity that's indifferent to the steep decline of the population. As the member for Hull West and Hessel passionately highlighted, we shouldn't have to wait for a species to become endangered before extending protections to it. I therefore ask the Minister today if the department has any plans to reverse this approach and ensure that the rhetoric on protecting species abundance matches the reality. If we're aiming for abundance, it seems to be that raising the threshold for species protections is a step in the wrong direction, certainly when species have faced such a dramatic reduction in numbers. Will the Minister support the beloved prickly mammal that our country is so passionate about in the upcoming review? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And it's a great pleasure to serve under you. I don't think I've had that pleasure before, so it's very nice to see you, Chair. As with all honourable members and friends today for this debate. First of all, I must thank the honourable member from Stockton South for introducing the debate and actually making a very clear case, as he always does in these petition debates. And he referred to that debate in 2015, and I think a number of honourable friends and members were probably at that debate. I've got to say, Chair, don't know if you were there, Chair, it was actually one of the best debates I've ever attended in Parliament, and and it was about hedgehogs, and it was by the then Right Honourable Friend for Penrith and Borders. So it stayed in my mind, and I think today demonstrates, with the number of speakers we've had, with a number of people who signed that petition, just how heartfelt this whole issue of hedgehogs is, these wonderful creatures. And yes, we've had some wonderful references to all sorts of hedgehog charities and organisations, and I do want to thank them all. We've had Hessel Hedgehog Rescue Centre, Hedgehog High Street, Wildlife Aid, the Hedgehog Preservation Society, who actually arranged this petition and do so much good work, and are indeed in the constituency of our Right Honourable Friend from Ludlow, who couldn't be here but did want to make sure that we thank them and all the work they do in his constituency. We've had Snuffles Hedgehog Rescue Centre, and indeed we must not forget Horace the film buff hedgehog, who is, I'm sorry he's outdoing you for your other debates, my Right Honourable Friend from Harley, but I think that just goes to show the strength of feeling. And what I did want to say in this debate is, this government is absolutely committed to ensuring that our native species thrive as we take action to address the declines that we're all so sad about. And we are, and I as the Minister, am deeply concerned about the findings of the Red List for British Mammals published in 2020 by the Mammal Society, which has classed hedgehogs as vulnerable. And I particularly am a great fan of hedgehogs. I've, not least from reading All My Children, Mrs. Tiggywinkle, that amazing Beatrix Potter book. But as a backbencher, I did work with others, and we got hedgehog highways into, we secured a reference in the National Planning Policy Framework for hedgehog highways. That is in there now. And only today I have made a speech on green infrastructure to the Town Planning Association, and I referenced hedgehog highways again. I will of course give way.
I warmly congratulate her on that success. Now she has a real opportunity in her current role, because the Minister's going to be signing off on environmental land management schemes. A good, simple scheme to promote hedgerows is great for farmers and even better for hedgehogs. I hope we're going to see that in the elm schemes.
Minister. I thank her very much for that intervention, and I know she's obviously passionate about this and indeed worked in the department. But I'm sure she knows, we've just announced our Sustainable Farming Initiative details, and the elm scheme is very much about habitats. It's about bringing nature back. It's about being able to sustainably produce food, and there will be an emphasis on corridors, on wildlife corridors, particularly river corridors. All these things will benefit our native wildlife, but particularly hedgehogs. So she is right about that, and I shall be taking advantage of the opportunity. And indeed, I have been speaking up for them. And I've got to mention, Chair, my own West Hatch Animal Rescue Centre, which is just over the hill from where I live, who do absolutely brilliant work when hedgehogs are orphaned. And I've been up there, and they've got all these baby hedgehogs that are underweight, they can't get through the winter, so they take them on, and they literally drip feed them from pipettes to keep them alive. And then I was very honoured that my garden was vetted because I garden for wildlife, and I was deemed acceptable to receive some of these then fashioned up hedgehogs. So I had some released in my garden. But I was in Parliament one day and they said, you have to have a hedgehog house. I thought, what is that? So I was Googling, what is a hedgehog house? I had to build a hedgehog house in order to receive this hedgehog, which we duly did. Of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend, honourable friend.
Can I tell the Minister that in the Royal Town of Sutton Coldfield we make hedgehog boxes, and if she would like one for her garden, it would be my pleasure to ensure one is delivered to her at Westminster.
Minister,
now thank you, Chair. There is the kind of offer I would find it hard to refuse. But what is quite interesting, we went to all this effort in making this house, then releasing the hedgehog into it. And of course, I don't think the hedgehog ever lived in the house ever again, because I think my garden was much more suited to it than the actual house. But that's not to say the ones from Sutton Coldfield won't be a great deal better than the ones from Taunton Dean. Just to move on though, on the serious points, as we look to conserve and protect our native hedgehogs, we've got to consider the reasons for their decline. And the main threat to the hedgehog decline is habitat loss, as so many honourable friends and members have actually referenced, particularly right honourable friend from Chipping Norton, Blaydon, honourable member from Blaydon, and indeed Strangford, who is now not in his place. But and these threats of habitat change have been due to things like agricultural intensification and the change and the deterioration in the actual habitat, but that has affected much of our other wildlife as well. And Schedule 5 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 focuses on deliberate harm against the species. And whilst I agree with the sentiment of my honourable friend's proposal to ensure we protect our hedgehogs, it is not clear, that's particularly from Epsom and Ewell, it's not clear that the species is being threatened in this way, and therefore that protection under the Act would actually address the main challenges that the species faces. Although I was interested to hear about this potential selling of hedgehogs and collecting them and selling. If indeed there is evidence of that from the Hedgehog Preservation Society, I would certainly like to see it, because that has not been flagged to me, and that is something that would concern me. I must go on now to the points that so many members have mentioned, particularly from Chipping Barnet, Epsom, Ewell, North Norfolk, Hull, Western Hessel and Blaydon, about the Schedule 6 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So the hedgehog is listed under Schedule 6 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which does make it an offence to kill or take listed animals by certain methods, such as types of traps and snares. And the quinquennial review that has been referred to by many process reviews Schedules 5 and 8 of the Act, and the JNCC will make recommendations with regard to these lists. And as I've highlighted previously to a number of honourable friends and members, that no changes to the species protection have yet been recommended to us, nor any decisions made, and proposals for change will be formally consulted on later this year, and government will then consider the recommendations and advice provided by the JNCC before making any decisions. Of course I will.
I'm grateful for giving way. Does she not think that it might be sensible, given the fact that she accepted in the debate on the Environment Bill, and I'm grateful for that, that the current legislative framework is really no longer fit for purpose in today's world? Would it not be better to set aside the quinquennial review and just get on with replacing the system? Because that way, if we carry on with what we've got at the moment, it's just going to cause confusion and uncertainty. Better to say this not works anymore, doesn't work anymore, and do something different.
Okay, I hear what he says, and we have discussed this in METS at length, and I thank him for that. And as I've said previously, it is a priority for us to provide the legislative protections and policy interventions needed for our wildlife, including, of course, declines in hedgehogs. I'm determined that we will get this right, and towards this aim and ambition, as he will know, we've recently announced a green paper, and my department will begin a review of species legislation with a view to enhancing and modernising it. And we intend to publish the green paper and seek views later in the year. But I absolutely agree with him that we do need a better approach to addressing threats to our species, indeed to a whole range of our species, and that's what this Green Paper will focus on. And furthermore, then we've got the Environment Bill, which will strengthen our commitment to species like hedgehogs. We've amended the bill to require a new holistic, legally binding target for species abundance by 2030 to be set. And the aim of that is to halt the decline in nature. This is a really strong commitment, the like of which we have never seen before. And I think it demonstrates this government is determined that we will get this right. Indeed, in my view, we have to get this right. And I do agree with a number of friends and members who have spoken, that particularly the member from my honourable friend from Thanet. He was very forceful about this. This is urgent, and we need to get on with it, and we do need to do it. But also, we are taking action through a range of other measures that I honestly do believe will help, have also been referred, especially to my honourable friend from Chipping Barnet. The net gain provisions in the bill, which will mean that every single new development will have to put back 10% more nature than there was there when they started. And indeed, I know that many developers will put back more than that. And that will help hedgehog habitats. We're also introducing through the bill local nature recovery strategies, which have also been referred to. And these strategies will help identify local biodiversity priorities in order to improve the coordination of the whole conservation effort, but at scale. And they will be beneficial to species like hedgehogs. And, of course, I will give way.
For giving way. Sorry. I thank the Minister for giving way. And I just wanted to, on paper, as I said, all these things sound great. What's essential is that we have both the resources to enforce those requirements and that we're very specific. Too many times we see hedgerows ripped out, even where there is supposed to be protection and other things. How will the Minister ensure that these are effective?
Minister.
I thank you for that, but one cannot rip hedgerows out now. I mean, all of these measures are a combined portfolio, a toolbox of measures that will combine to improve our nature and put back our declining species. And the local nature recovery strategies are the key that will be used on the ground by the local authorities, and it will give them the opportunity to determine what they want where. It's like a mapping system. What they want where there is good nature, where it could be better, where they'd rather just focus on industry, and all of those things building together. And they will be able to make a hedgehog a priority if they so wish. So I am confident that we have a very good framework that will be in place through the Environment Bill, and also through the bill and also through our farming new Agriculture Act now. We have got this, and having left the Common Agricultural Policy, we've now got these schemes so that our land use will deliver environmental benefits through the Sustaining Farming Incentive, the Local Nature Recovery Scheme, and then our much bigger Landscape Recovery Scheme, which will link up whole areas, and potentially it will have those corridors that we all need for our wildlife to move about. And these schemes will, for sustainable farming in particular, will be able to create and preserve woodlands, heathlands, species-rich grassland, a whole range of habitats that will benefit hedgehogs in particular. Some very serious points were made about planning, and indeed the DEFRA department is in close consultation with MHCLG, particularly on this whole issue of sustainable development. And indeed hedgehog highways, swift boxes, ponds, or all of these things that we're flagging really need to go into our developments of the future, together with all the things like sustainable urban drainage and the things that will affect our water quality, our flooding, and all of those things as well. So it should all knit together. So, Chair, there's obviously huge interest in hedgehog protection. I want to thank all honourable friends and members who have taken part and made such very, very strong cases. And I think I have just got time, Chair, to give way to the honourable member from Strangford, because he's always so polite.
Thank you, Minister, for giving way. Minister, a number of people, including myself, put forward the issue in relation to planning, and you just referred to it there now. Can I ask the Minister, is it possible before anybody does any work in any site or any particular development that they could be asked to remove any hedgehogs and relocate them? Because if, as what you said, there have been many farms that would wish very much to take hedgehogs in their place. Is that possible?
Minister.
I thank him for that intervention. It's an interesting suggestion, and of course through the Environment Bill we are bringing in new measures for strategies for certain wider groups of species and wildlife to look after the habitats, but also so that we are dealing with this on a more comprehensive scale for our wildlife, rather than an itsy-bitsy way we do it all now, which often actually frustrates the development too because it holds it up. So, but through all this biodiversity net gain, the nature that's got to be put back by developers, they will be conscious that they have to look at all these things like the hedgehog population, just as we do now with dormice and so on. So I shall wind up on that note. I do hope that I have outlined that this government has a real desire, and I do believe the framework to protect nature and biodiversity on a national scale, and that we are committed to reviewing species legislation so that we do get it right, and we give the assurances that we will be looking after our absolutely much loved, indeed revered hedgehogs.
Matt Vickers to wind up.
Thank you very much. As ever, enthusiasm, energy and passion from the Minister. We know that she's passionate about our wildlife and our nature, and there is a commitment there to working to further the interests of hedgehogs. Like my honourable friend, I'm hopeful we won't be having this debate in a few years' time, and I'm hoping there'll be some robust population growth. Members from North Thanet, from Epsom Ewell, from Chippen Bannet talked about the need for a wider cross-government look at this, and it would be good to get the planning ministers looking at this issue. It needs to be in every thought, in every department. The member for Harlow and Horace, or Boris the Hedgehog, and his Sluggy Concarney, it shows wherever you go, a hedgehog raises a smile in Bladen, Chippen Barnet, North Norfolk, Sheffield Hat, local champions across the country in every corner of the UK, even in Northern Ireland, who do fantastic work to support our hedgehogs. Hugely successful debate. Thank you to the Minister for the thoughts, and thank you to members for the thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. The question is that this House has considered E-petition 550379 relating to the protection of hedgehogs. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until